4 houses on one property? How could that be? Hi, I'm Sunny. Today I want to talk to you about a bill that I've been following known as California's SB9 bill. Now this bill seems awfully close to getting passed into law, and if it does, I believe it's going to create a seismic shift in the California real estate industry. Now I'll talk a little bit about what's in this bill, what it means for property owners, what it means for investors and developers, as well as some opposing viewpoints on this bill. And then after that, we'll take a look at what steps this bill has left if it's going to be passed into law. Now please note that these are my personal views and opinions. I am not providing financial advice or legal advice, and I am not qualified to do so. If you do plan to take any sort of actions or decisions based on this information, please do your own research and consult with your legal and financial professionals. With that said, let's get into it because this is awfully exciting. Last week, California State Assembly passed SB9 by a 45-19 vote. This bill was created to increase the housing supply and make housing more accessible by allowing up to 4 housing units on a single-family zoning parcel where previously only 1 unit was allowed. Before we get into the details, it is important to note SB9 is different from Bill SB10 that also recently passed in the Assembly. SB10 streamlines housing density increases for up to 10 units, but it is voluntary for municipalities to adopt. Much like recent ADU laws AB 68 and AB 881, SB9 is a bill that creates state-level housing mandates that override local municipality planning code. It is intentionally done to prevent communities from using new or existing ordinances to limit SB9 impact outside of a few conditions that it specifies. So what does SB9 do? The biggest change is that an owner of a residential single-family property can subdivide the property into 2 separate parcels. The resulting parcels must be at least 1,200 square feet each, and any one of these parcels must be between 40 and 60% of the original parcel size. Furthermore, it states on each of the subdivided properties that at least 2 800 square foot units are allowed to be constructed. It goes on to say that these units can be constructed adjacent to each other, provided that building code safety standards are met. Let's see a couple examples. Suppose we have a property on a lot that is 8,000 square feet in a municipality with a 45% FAR. FAR is the floor area ratio, and it often limits the size of a building on a lot. FAR is typically calculated as the amount of usable floor area of a building relative to the overall lot size. In this example, our lot is 8,000 square feet, so it would be possible to have a 3,600 square foot house built on the property. Under SB9, it would be possible to split this property into 2 4,000 square foot lots. Each lot would support an 1,800 square foot home. So we could choose to put 1 unit on each of the new parcels, but SB9 actually allows for a minimum of 2 units on each parcel. Now, some local municipalities may allow more, but the bill requires for at least 2. In this case, if we evenly split the area, we would have 2 900 square foot units in each parcel for a total of 4 900 square foot units. But of course, we don't have to split it evenly like this. One of the units could be larger than the other. In another example, let's use a 6,000 square foot lot, again with a 45% FAR. It would be possible to split this property into 2 3,000 square foot lots. Based on the FAR, each lot would support a 1,350 square foot house. However, because SB9 requires at least 2 800 square foot units to be constructed on each parcel, it would actually be possible to build 2 800 square foot homes even if it exceeds the local FAR codes. There are some limitations that will curb the eligibility for SB9. The biggest is that property owners submitting for SB9 subdivision must sign an affidavit that they intend to reside in one of the units as a primary residence for at least 3 years from the date of subdivision. Furthermore, the parcel cannot be low-income housing, rent-controlled, historic, or occupied by a tenant in the last 3 years. Also, it cannot be a property that was previously subdivided under SB9. SB9 does not override the Coastal Act of 1976 for coastal properties, other than giving local agencies a way of waiving the requirement for public hearings. In addition, Jurisdictions can block SB9 in situations where there would be an adverse public health or safety or environmental impact that cannot be mitigated. So what does SB9 mean for California housing? A study done by UCLA looked at the impact of allowing single-family zoning to build a fourplex. They found that out of 7.5 million residential single-family parcels in California, only about 400,000 parcels actually make sense to build when factoring local property values, construction costs, and parcel sizes. Furthermore, it is estimated that almost 6% of these parcels would likely not proceed with a subdivision due to the requirement of the owner keeping one of the units as a primary residence for 3 years, based on a study done by Berkeley. This also does not account for personal preference of owners who simply wouldn't want to split their property and have additional neighbors, or who may not know how to go through with the subdivision process even if they wanted to do it. California has a massive housing shortage. In a study by McKinsey, California ranked 49 out of 50 states for housing per capita. McKinsey also found California needs to add about 3.5 million housing units by 2025 just to keep up with demand. And the lack of housing, well, it costs the state to lose over $140 billion a year. That's 6% of the state's annual GDP. SB9 can be part of the solution, but it's clear that much more housing will be needed. Still, in the short term, this bill has the potential to create a building boom, much like the recent ADU legislature passed in 2019. So now we've talked about what SB9 is, we've walked through a couple examples of how it might work, and we've gotten an idea of the scope of the number of units it could possibly create in light of the number of units which are needed to help solve the California housing crisis. Next, I'd like to talk about what SB9 means to homeowners and real estate professionals. I think for homeowners, it's interesting that they could potentially create these extra units on their property, but I think it remains to be seen how many homeowners have the resources and the inclination to build these extra units on their property and then manage them as rentals. For me, the part that I think is a game changer is the ability for homeowners to subdivide. Because in the past, if a homeowner wanted to access equity in their property, they would typically turn to a financial product like a home equity line or a cash out refinance. Otherwise, they could just sell their property, but that also has issues because they would have to then find a new property to live in, and that can be difficult in this type of housing market. In addition, for some homeowners, they have a really good property tax advantage because they've been in their property for a long time and they're paying a relatively low property tax, which will get reset if they switch properties. Now, if you're a homeowner and you're interested in looking at subdividing your property, please check out subdividemyproperty.com. There'll be more information there, and you can sign up to get advice to find out if your property is a good fit for a subdivision. Now, I'd like to talk about real estate professionals in terms of investors and developers. I think for investors, SB9 is going to open up a whole new ballgame. It's going to create opportunities to build multiple units on a property, or perhaps work with the owner and subdivide a property. And if you're an investor and you're excited about the potential and opportunities SB9 might bring, please check out SB9invest.com and sign up. There'll be more information there. For developers, I think SB9 is going to be a bit of a mixed blessing. On one hand, SB9 can potentially create demand for hundreds of thousands of units. On the other hand, California hasn't added that many housing units in the last few years combined. So for developers, they're going to potentially see a huge increase in demand, and they may not necessarily be able to meet that demand. For developers, the labor is often a limiting factor on how many houses they can build, and the labor pool is not easy to grow in construction because it requires often years of apprenticeship and obtaining a license before a tradesman can do a particular task. I think it's something that California is going to have to note and work on improving, because unless there's ways to get additional labor or change this process, it may not be sustainable. Next, I'd like to touch on the political viewpoints of SB9, and then we can see what steps it has remaining to become law. Proponents of SB9 bring up the fact that California needs to increase its residential housing density, and single-family zoning is the most pervasive of residential housing, but the densities of single-family zoning haven't increased much. And it's easy to see why, because communities of single-family zoning don't really have much of incentive to increase the density. After all, They typically purchase their homes in those areas because they like the look and feel of that neighborhood, and they don't necessarily want that to change drastically. In addition, a lot of individuals have their financial wealth tied to the value of their properties. And the concern there is if the housing density is dramatically increased and there becomes a supply of a lot more houses available, then that could potentially impact property values. And so generally communities are opposed to these type of propositions. SB9 will basically force the communities to increase the density. In addition to this, proponents of SB9 bring up the point that some subdivisions were actually developed with discriminatory practices in mind. These practices, known as redlining, were when the initial plan for the neighborhoods were done, some neighborhoods were split where you would have really wealthy areas where you'd have requirements to have large plots of land, and they were generally made expensive, and then you had other areas which were low income and they were very dense. And so you had this inherent separation because of the nature of the affordability of the different properties. And sometimes it even was outright racist, where individuals of a certain color could not buy properties in one area, but they could buy in another. Now, the times have changed, but some of these neighborhoods still have the same structure. And the argument is that we should make a more uniform density across the neighborhoods, and we don't have this initial discrimination carrying forward. Now, I'd like to look at the skeptics' arguments. Skeptics of SB9 bring up the point that SB9 is going to create unplanned development at a massive scale. And the issue with that is the communities that we live in have had a lot of thought and planning and infrastructure put in place to support the number of individuals that they have. If we dramatically increase that, it could lead to a lot of problems. Just think about it. If there starts to become issue with no more parking on the street, or the schools don't have enough capacity, or the water supply is not sufficient, or the sewage supply is not sufficient, or the parks don't have enough space for all the individuals that are moving into the community. These can be real problems. And they're definitely problems which are solvable, but it might be difficult for communities to deal with this in light of rapid expansion. In addition, another argument is that it may be possible to meet housing demand by focusing on rezoning other areas, like focusing on increasing multifamily, as well as possibly shifting commercial zoning into residential. But it remains to be seen how open cities are to transitioning their commercial zoning to residential. Now that we have talked about SB9, let's discuss the next steps for it to become a law. In California, for a bill to become law, it has to pass both the state Senate and Assembly. SB9 has already passed in the state Senate, and last week it passed in the state Assembly with amendments. Because it was amended, it needs to return back to the Senate for a concurrent vote, where the Senate will review and then possibly approve the amendments. If the Senate advances the bill, it will go to the governor's desk for signing. At this time, Governor Newsom has not publicly stated his position on the bill. The governor can approve the bill by signing it or not taking any action. If the governor decides to veto the bill, a 2/3 vote by both the state Senate and Assembly will be required within 60 days to override the veto. If the governor approves the bill, it will become law starting January 1st, 2022, unless an emergency clause is added to make it effective sooner. So there you have it. SB9 has the potential to be one of the most profound changes to California housing rules in years. It will literally change the landscape. I'm excited to see what happens next. If you are too, please subscribe. I'll be posting updates as I get to know more about what's going on with this bill. Also, if you have questions or comments, I know this bill has created a lot of strong opinions on both sides, and both of them have valid arguments. So I'd love to hear your feedback below. And once again, if you're looking to possibly in the future subdivide your property, or you're looking for investment opportunities, please click the links down below and make sure you sign up so that you can get more information as it becomes available. Like always, this is Sunny saying, can you dig it? And we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.